It's a completely different experience being part of New York on September 11th. And I had the opportunity to remark to my young son, who was 7 years old at the time, that a friend of mine was starting the very next day, on Monday, September 10th, and I pointed up, in that tower right there, he'll be starting his job. So that's always something interesting in Manhattan when you see these huge complex of skyscrapers and buildings, to know that you have a personal connection to somebody who actually gets to live and work in a place like that. And I first got a page at 8:35 in the morning on September 11th, was that we had a possible hijack, an aircraft from Boston, currently over Albany, New York at 31,000 feet and heading southbound. I immediately went out to the operational floor and went up to the operations manager in charge, informed him what I knew, and he told me, yes, it is in fact a confirmed hijacking. And they had in fact spoke to American Airlines dispatchers who had spoke to flight attendants on board the aircraft who reported that there were hijackers and they had knives and bombs, and at least one person was injured and one person was already dead. Of course, at that time, it immediately strikes you that this is not a drill. This is not a suspected activity. This is confirmed. We have a significant event taking place in our air traffic system on that day. We in turn briefed all the controllers in the area to be on the lookout for a possible aircraft coming down, unknown target, heading southbound. The controllers would go to aircraft that were overflying that area and ask them to report, do you see an American aircraft at a certain altitude heading in a certain destination? And it wasn't long, within 5 minutes, that we had picked up a primary target of an aircraft and were able to get a visual confirmation from other aircraft that was in fact the American 767 that was hijacked, American 11 out of Boston. In the middle of that, we also got United 175, which was another aircraft departing from Boston, a Boeing 767, who reported to us that they had heard something suspicious on the frequency over in Boston Center. It sounded like an aircraft in trouble, possible hijack. Unfortunately, that was the last transmission that we had with United 175, although just previous to that, United 175 was actually one of those aircraft that helped us to identify American 11 was in fact the suspect aircraft going southbound. I made the assumption the aircraft was tracking southbound following the Hudson River, and we knew that the aircraft was descending by the pilot reports of the other aircraft that we overflew the aircraft with. We started coordination with the military through the military operations specialists at New York Center to intercept or intervene in the situation, or at least follow the aircraft. My assumption at the time was that, due to reports of the bombs and knives on board, that more than likely something had happened on board the aircraft, perhaps a bomb had gone off and they lost electrical systems on board the aircraft, which is why we lost communication with the aircraft, and why we also lost what's known as the transponder, or that ability to track a specific aircraft based upon a code on board the aircraft. Knowing that there was a definite event occurring, knowing that there's a possibility of an emergency on board the aircraft, I started to prepare the controllers and the surrounding facilities in the event that the aircraft attempted to make an emergency landing in the New York area, was where the aircraft was appeared to going. As I was in the process of doing that final coordination with the New York TRACON and the towers underneath the New York TRACON, Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark, I was on the telephone. At the same time, I'm listening to controllers talking behind me in the area. And I heard one controller, Dave Patiglia, mentioned to me, I think we have another one. And at the same time, I'm talking to the New York TRACON operations manager and traffic management supervisor and telling them that We have an American 767, he's heading southbound, he's descending along the Hudson River, may try to make an emergency landing, possibly Newark Airport, since Newark is closest aligned with the Hudson River. And just as that occurred, was in a Newark Tower controller came up and said, the aircraft has hit the World Trade Center. But at the same time, when I'm hearing in the background the conversation taking place between Dave Battaglia, Ivana Dallas, Paul Thumster, and the other controllers, I knew there was another aircraft being hijacked. So I immediately warned the Newark Tower and New York TRACON that we have another event going on. Do not make any assumptions that this was an accident. Do not make any assumptions that this is the last event. We may have more going on. Immediately, I instructed the operations manager, Bruce Barris, to stop all aircraft, all departures in the New York metropolitan area. Because with two hijacked aircraft converging in the New York area, you have to clear the airspace because you have an obvious safety threat, not only a security threat, against other airborne aircraft. But as the second aircraft was also hijacked and the first aircraft hit the World Trade Center, I immediately made the connection that this was not a single event. This was an attack upon our country, that they were using our system that I love tremendously, both as air traffic and as aviation, and using that as a weapon against what was occurring. And I knew that the only way that we could stop that, to prevent them from using our world premier aviation system as a weapon, was to get all of the aircraft out of the skies around New York. We immediately went to work on briefing all the supervisors on sterilizing New York Center airspace, that no aircraft were to be taking into the airspace. All aircraft currently in the airspace had to exit the airspace. And probably one of the little known things that is shared about New York Center is that they're also an oceanic air traffic control facility. So this meant at very early in the morning, as flights were halfway across the Atlantic Ocean to land in the United States, we had already initiated protocols to shut those arrivals off from the oceanic areas, and they had to make tough decisions such as either turn around and go back to Europe or go to alternate destinations, which many of them did in Canada. And there was little time to engage in long conversation or lengthy explanations about what we're doing, but basically it came down to, this is it, this is the only way we can protect our country, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to move forward from here. I think probably it was very significant for the men and women who are the air traffic controllers in New York, not just at New York Center, but at the towers and at New York TRACON, was because it was our neighbors, our friends, our family that were impacted by what happened on September 11th. So many employees at New York Center had emergency responders, police, fire, rescue, or had, like me, friends who, or family who worked in the World Trade Center. So not only were they on the front lines for having to defend our country, they were on the front lines for having to suffer the impact of what happened to our country on that day. When I look back upon that tragic day, the thing that hits me the deepest is my pride in how all of our air traffic folks in the New York area came together and rose to the occasion and did the right thing and did it so well that it amazed the rest of the world.